This is Red and April. Welcome to our channel. We are completely off the grid and living in an RV while we build our house. This is our original design and we are doing all of the work ourselves. Be sure to subscribe and click the little bell to follow our progress and join us in seeing how it's going to turn out. In this video, we are installing the metal roof, trim, and gutters. It's a really exciting step moving us closer to being dried in.
The day the metal came in, we were ready to get started, and so the first order of business was the piece of trim that goes along the front edge of the house. Now this was actually kind of a change in my plans late in the day, so these pieces that you see here, these large L pieces, they're 6 inches on each side. We'd originally planned to put in just like a 2-inch drip edge along the front of the house, but we decided that that would leave too much of the wood exposed to the sun on that southern side, which gets a lot of sun exposure. Didn't want that because we felt like it would prematurely, age the wood, dry, crack, and then have a maintenance issue later on. So we wanted to cover up the wood, and so this 6-inch trim was perfect to go from the bottom of the actual metal roofing down to the top of the beams, and so it was the perfect height. We actually liked the look of the wooden beam going across the metal beams, but since we had to cover that up, we didn't want just 6 inches of white above that, so I decided to spray paint the bottom portion the same color as the beams. So right above the beams you would see this 3-inch bar, which would look like kind of like a metal beam, and then it would turn to white. And so it would break that up, and we thought that would look nice. And so that was the kind of, as soon as I got these pieces peeled, then I taped and spray painted with the same paint that we used on the beams, and then installed them. They were really easy to install, just put them in place and use some roofing nails to attach them. Unfortunately, a fair amount of the trim pieces came bent or damaged along the edge, and so the gutter was the next part of the project, and the gutter was bent pretty badly, not only along the edge, but along the center. And you can see here I'm having to straighten them out. And I've done just a little bit of sheet metal work, not a ton, but I know enough to kind of, to fix this amount of damage. And basically what I needed was something underneath to support the metal, and so I just stacked up some wood and had the metal resting on the wood, and then I got a rubber hammer and kind of hammered up against that wood, and that flattened it out pretty well. I'm actually using a dead blow here. That was the orange one, and then right now I'm using a black hammer, which is an even softer hammer, so that it doesn't leave marks on this metal. The dead blow is actually leaving little dents that were barely visible, whereas this black hammer really didn't leave any kind of hammer marks on the metal. It just kind of conforms the metal to the shape of whatever is supporting it. So I had a flat board underneath, and so it just kind of made the metal conform to that flat board. So it worked out really well and didn't leave marks. So the black hammer was the right tool here. A lot of these trim pieces were actually made special for this project, bent to the specifications of our roof to follow the angle of the pitch or whatever the case may be, and which was the case with these gutters. And so we certainly couldn't return them, so pretty much our only option was to fix them unless we were willing to wait 6 to 12 weeks to get new ones made up and sent in. So I didn't even call the factory. I just fixed it and we installed them. They looked just fine once we got them fixed, and they installed really well. Here we are actually installing the gutter on the low side of the roof. Basically, it's really easy. You just start on one end and just work your way to the other end with doing about a 3 to 4 inch overlap, and using silicone when we did that overlap so that we got a good seal. And then you just have to use roofing nails to nail it to that leading edge there on the back side of the house. You just nail it down to that edge, and then the metal actually goes over the top of that, what you nailed down, and it fits really nice. It also came with some gutter straps, which I'll show you how those install later. I thought it was a pretty neat system. I wanted a gutter that had plenty of capacity to handle all the heavy rainfall that we get at times here, and really wasn't paying much attention to the size, but when it came in I noticed that it was exactly 6 inches deep. So from the edge where it bent over where we nailed it on to the bottom of the gutter was 6 inches down, which is exactly the height of the roof. And so it worked out perfect. It comes down and sits flush with the top of the beams, but I was really happy that it wasn't any bigger, or it would have extended past the beams and interfered with the beams and actually would have caused a big problem, would have been a really big pain. And it really worked out good. So these are big gutters that should handle everything we need. Once we had the front trim installed and the gutter in place, we were ready to actually start putting up the sheeting. So really excited about this and pretty intimidated by it. These are really long sheets because they go the entire span of the roof, including the overhang. So it's one continuous piece all the way. And so that ended up being, for me, 29 feet and 6 inches. Here we are attaching the first piece on the roof, and this is always really critical because it kind of sets the pattern for how the other pieces will fall. And so I was really worried about getting this piece straight enough, and honestly, I was worried about the squareness of the house. Because if your house isn't perfectly square, as you put each piece on, it'll walk farther and farther off, and sometimes you can't keep up with it with minor adjustments. And so anyway, I was pretty intimidated to get this first piece in. But we just kind of did the best we could, lined it up with the side of the wall and went with it. And here we are putting on the second or third piece, and it's actually going really well. And so hoping that'll carry through as this project goes on. It's actually a good way to see how square your roof is when you start installing roofing, it'll tell you very quickly. These sheets are really long. They're 29 feet, 6 inches long, and we had never worked with anything this long before, maybe 14 feet long, 16 feet long, but, this is almost twice that. And so how in the world do two people get something this long and this heavy up on a roof? We actually ended up getting the idea of how to get these up there off another YouTuber channel. It's Midlife Crisis, and they were actually putting up sheeting that's almost exactly the same length as what we're putting up. And so this is how they did it. They put up 2 extendable ladders, leaned them up against the side, and then, hooked onto the metal with clamps, and then used just ropes to pull the metal up the ladder. And so we saw them do it, and we're like, man, we actually tried it another way the first time, our very first sheet. We tried just kind of carrying it by hand up ourselves, which is terrifying. It really wasn't safe. And so then we took the time to set it up like we'd seen these other folks do, and man, it worked great. It was still a pretty heavy piece of metal, and it's really all 2 people want. It did feel safe. Pulling it up the ladder didn't feel like it was going to get away from us or anything. Also, we didn't have kind of the right clamps. We ended up having to use some C-clamps and make it work. But in the end, it worked out just fine. I wrapped the tooth of the C-clamp with tape so that it wouldn't mar the paint on the panels, and then just connected a rope to it, tightened it down really good, and then we'd both climb up the ladder and pull it up with ropes. These are the gutter straps to attach the gutter, and they're actually just a piece of metal 12 inches long that's shaped like one of the grooves in the roofing metal. And what you do is you slide it up under the roofing metal and then slide it out and connect it to the inside of the gutter at the right width away from the end of the metal. And so what it does is it makes it to where the water coming off the roof in the bottom of that channel goes into that gutter below the top rim of the gutter. The top rim is higher, and so you don't lose any water as it's coming down the spout. It's a really nice design. Well, we're working our way across here, and so far it seems to be staying nice and straight. I'm so pleased. Every time we lay a piece down and, get it lined up with the grooves and get it right there, we're not seeing any stepping. It's all lining up. So that really makes us happy. It shows us that the roof is square and it's going good so far. So for each of these pieces that we brought up, we went through a little kind of process. So before we put this piece on, we would put a bead of caulk or just silicone, clear silicone, along the leading edge of the last piece, and then as this next piece comes in, it overlaps and seals along that edge. We'd also put in closure strips, which is a foam piece that's shaped to the contour of the inside of the metal. We'd put that top and bottom, and that seals basically so there's no air gaps at the very end of the metal on your roof. And then we would also attach the gutter. So we'd go through this process every time, and then we also completely screwed each piece down. Just like to have it done as we're moving across. So as we're moving across the roof here, getting this done, we're done. Everything that's behind us is done. We don't have to come back and mess with it again. So I'll tell you how we ended up doing these screws on this. So there's actually a lot of controversy on the proper way to screw in a pro-panel roof like this. There's the school of thought that thinks you need to put the screws in through the top of the ridge, because the water is going to be running down in the channel, and at the top of the ridge, the water's not going to be there as long, so that's the best way to do it. Actually, the factory recommendation is to put screws in the bottom of the channel and to put one screw in each channel, and the channels are a foot wide or a foot between ridges. And to do that on 4-foot spacing. So what we decided to do was kind of a hybrid, actually. So in the middle of the roof, we decided to put the screws on the top of the ridge. Even though that's not what the factory recommends, we felt like that's the best way to do it, in the middle of the roof for our situation, mostly because it's such a low slope roof. Like it would give us the best chance of not having leaks if we put the screws on the top of the ridges. But we only did that in the middle of the roof. On the front and back edges of the roof, we actually followed the factory recommendations and put the screws down in the channel, and we put them at the factory recommended interval, which is one on each side of that channel. So you're putting them in there pretty close together. It ends up being with them being about, 1 every 6 inches or so apart. It's a lot of screws on that leading edge, and that's because the wind catches that edge, and you want it to be really securely fastened at that edge. So we did it just like the factory said, down in the channel, close together. Same at the back, but in the middle there, where it didn't need to be as securely attached, we just put them up on the ridges, and we put them every 4 feet as you're going down, so kind of 4-foot spacing as you're going down the roof. And we just put one screw on every ridge. So the type of roofing we're using here is called R-panel, and so it just kind of designates the profile of the panel with this particular set of ridges. And so these ridges are 1.5 inches tall, and they're on 1-foot spacing. It's also extra thick or heavy duty. It's 26 gauge, so it's a very robust, strong material. It's plenty strong to have these purlins on 2-foot spacings, and you can still walk on the roof without fear of damaging it. And it's also is rated for this low slope. Those higher ridges allow it to be used on this low slope roof that a lot of the other stuff that you can buy only has like a 3/4 inch ridge or a 7/8 inch ridge. And those aren't rated for this low slope. Well, it's the end of the first day here of putting these sheeting on, and we've actually got 16 of the 18 sheets up, so we're almost done actually. And here we are the next morning getting back to work on these last 2 pieces. It's going to get tricky here in a minute because, we're building towards these ladders, and so in a minute these ladders are going to be in the way. It's also kind of a pain right now to get this sheet up over the edge of the ladder while you're standing on the previous sheet that you just installed. So here we are with the second to the last sheet. We're about to lug this up. The time lapse doesn't quite do the process justice here. These are actually really heavy, and it's a job for both of us to winch these up over the ladder. They actually like to get caught on that little step on the step ladder, and so you kind of have to give it a little jog to work it up over the step as you're kind of leaning out over the edge. So it's quite doable, and certainly the best way we could find, but it's a bit of a challenge. And then at the top, you got to really do kind of a clean and jerk type motion to get it up over your head and up over the top of the ladder. So we're glad to be almost through with this process here. For this last piece, it's not a full width piece, and it goes right to the edge where the ladders happen to be. And so in order to get this piece up there, I actually had to put a little furring strip on the side of the roof there that holds the ladder out away from the edge a little bit so that we could get that last piece in place with those ladders still there. Here I am cutting this strip to length. I used my pair of power shears, 2-bladed power shears that just cuts out that little curly strip in the middle there to make this long straight cut. And here I am actually making some more of the gutter strapping. We actually either didn't order enough or I'm putting them too close together. I put them every 2 feet, by the way, and we didn't quite have enough. We were a few short, and just cut some of those channels off, and those make perfect gutter strap. Finally putting the last piece on. This piece was cut to size about half width. Really exciting to get this last piece on, and this is, the last piece of full sheeting on the roof. Now we just have the side trim to put on after this. Here I am putting in just the last few screws, going up and down, making sure everything is all buttoned up and I haven't missed any screws. And then I'll be ready to get to work on the side trim. Well, the last part of this roof is the side trim, and they call the trim on the sides here that's traveling at that slope downward the rake trim, which I didn't know before, but apparently that's what they refer to it as. And like much of the other stuff, it came damaged, particularly on one side or the other, so I'm having to spend a little bit of time here and straighten out the metal, hammer it out or straighten it out, and then peel it. All the trim came covered in this plastic film to keep it from getting scratched, which was great. It definitely needs to be covered. It would be horribly scratched. It scratches real easy. But anyway, you got to peel that off before you put it on. I finished up one side, and then April came out and got a little video of me doing the other side. Enjoyed putting this stuff on. It's a 4-inch rake trim, so it's kind of an L piece. It bends over the side and goes down the side. You attach it to kind of that substrate of your eaves there. And so you just start at the bottom and put it on. And so it comes in 10-foot strips. And I'm just attaching that with roofing nails on the sides and then with, of course, screws in the top. Now it comes up over the top and it comes up 1.5 inches high and then comes back down. And that's so that if there's one of them ridges that's close to the edge, it'll come up over the ridge and then down into the valley, and that's where you screw it in. So one thing I might mention here real quick is ventilation. So there is an air gap between the foam and the bottom of this metal in between the purlins. Those purlins kind of come to an end on the side, and so there's this gap. And that gap allows, air to circulate or air to pass through the width of the roof all the way across. And these rake trim pieces that I'm putting on actually don't come up flush with the side of the roof on that side. There's a little gap, and then they come up over the top of the roof and come over and come down in such a way that it allows air to travel out from under the roof up into that channel and then follow the side of the roof to the upper side and the lower side and vent out there. So we do have some moderate amount of circulation and ventilation kind of built in so that air gap between the foam and the metal can breathe. We may decide to do something else later to add more if we need to. Well, it's really an incredible feeling to have this roof done. Our house is protected. If it rains, we don't have to worry about the roof being damaged, and it's going to provide a lot of protection for the walls. So it feels great to have this done. It's a big milestone. So really excited about this, and we're excited to move on to the next phase, which will be the walls. So up next, we're going to be putting the house wrap and the foam on the walls.
When we were about halfway done with the roof, we learned that our first grandchild had arrived. Baby and Mom were doing well. As soon as we had finished the roof, we made a trip to Texas to see our new granddaughter. She is definitely the cutest and sweetest baby ever. We are now also known as Grandma and Granddude.